power to the people.
All 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 right. Thank y'all for being here today. My name is Fidelis. I am chairman of our organization, New Vanguard. And as always, what we focus on is grassroots organizing in our community, political education, trying to bring people together so that we can come to an understanding about what's going on around us and the solutions that we can take part in, to try to address some of the issues that we're facing. The conversation / presentation for today is focused around science. April is Citizen Science Month, and as someone who majored in a STEM during college, I'm very passionate about science and science communication, and I think that it's one of the things that we are extremely lacking in today, especially for regular everyday folks. What kind of inspired me to want to bring this topic to the forefront was conversations that I've been a part of over the last few months, especially regarding science, technologies, climate change, community education. And there was a workshop that I was at where we were talking about climate change, and something was said that kind of bothered me a little bit. And what was said was that the companies and the people that currently profit from technologies and industries that are driving climate change will also be the same people that will profit from the solutions. And that was something that I just could not accept, right? Because if we're talking about climate solutions, how can we, in our right minds, ethically come to that conclusion that the same people who are the drivers of the problem, we will allow them to be the same people that will profit from the solution? And that kind of makes me begin to question what interests are really being served when these kinds of conversations and these kinds of things are going on. And so one of the things that I talk about in coming up with this discussion for today is the nature of science, particularly in this country, and the tendency for scientists, institutions of science and health, to put forward the narrative that science and health are apolitical. And I think that that's a problematic narrative, because what it does is it would lead somebody to believe that science has no place or plays no real role in the politics of a society. So then you should really think about then what is the purpose of scientific research, right? What is the purpose of health research and clinical trials and all these things that we do in the science and health field? All of these things are done to hopefully bring forward discoveries that would help to push our societies forward in areas of science and health. And the ways that these things are often accomplished is through policy, right? That's why you have people who go up and speak at Congress and go up and speak at your, talk to your senators and things like that. So if you say that science and health are apolitical, then what is the purpose of doing all that? And it's to understand that science is fundamentally at the foundations of politics of a society, right? Society's civilization is often credited to agriculture. Agriculture sort of helped humans establish some of the first cities in our history, right? And agriculture is something that is established through a science. And so science is really one of the main drivers of how a society decides to organize itself and the things that a society prioritizes. And so today we really want to get to the root of understanding what are the political implications of science in our society. And one of the things that, a quote I'll take from H. Rap Brown, he says that an individual does not dictate the way a system functions, but the system dictates how the individual functions, right? So under the systems that we exist under in this country, capitalism, white supremacy, and other things, those things fundamentally decide how science in this country is used. And oftentimes we see that in the outcomes of the largest portions of our national budgets going towards the military. A lot of science goes into warfare rather than into public health, right? We recently just witnessed NASA send, I believe it was 4 people around the moon. And there was a lot of conversation about the funding that NASA receives. And when you look into it, NASA really does not receive that much money in comparison to the military, right? But NASA is one of the fundamental institutions of science in our country. So today we're gonna have a presentation by Liam where he is gonna give some historical background to science and its political implications in different parts of the world, and then we'll have a conversation about the ways in which we see science in our societies and our communities, and what the political implications of science are. So I'll let Liam take it away with his presentation. Y'all give him a hand. He will.
Hey y'all.
Hello.
Like Fidel said, my name is Liam. Everyone here already knows me, I'm pretty sure. But I'm the vice chair of the Milledgeville chapter of the new Vanguard, and I prepared a little essay that I'd like to read to you all today. Apologies for not memorizing it, but this is the best we got right now. So some of you may know that April is a month that contains various science-related holidays. Notably, April 21st is the UN World Creativity and Innovation Day, and Earth Day is the following day, April 22nd. Like Fidelis mentioned, the month is considered Citizen Science Month and is intended to encourage the participation of the community in scientific research and projects. Considering the prevalence of science in April, we here at the New Vanguard wanted to take some time to recognize the importance of science. However, since we are also a political organization, we wanted to highlight the connections between science and politics. Hence our event's name, Political Science, how science shapes politics, policy, and power. Science and politics are often treated as two separate entities. Politics is our governance, elections, and so forth, while science is objective, methodical, and it explains the observations we make in our world. People on both the left and the right of the political spectrum will attempt to maintain this divide between the two. And while this may come with good intentions, in reality it obscures the legitimate connections that exist between them. Maintaining this divide limits our ability to analyze not only historical scientific moments, but also our modern scientific endeavors. In our last meeting, for those that attended, you may remember that we spoke about the compartmentalization of education. Essentially, we spoke about how the system seeks to divide disciplines into specific categories, math, science, English, history. While this has benefits in terms of organization, it majorly harms our ability to critically think, to draw from across all disciplines in our understandings. And the division of science from politics is ultimately a byproduct of this compartmentalization. So from here on out, we will not compartmentalize anymore, because we know that when we allow ourselves to do such, we are allowing the system to keep our understandings limited. So what I want to do now is take a little walk through our history in order to better illustrate the relevancy of politics to science. I'm going to start with a few examples of what I like to call right-wing science. When it comes to right-wing science, I'm not sure there's a more fitting place to begin than with the ideas of social Darwinism. Social Darwinism, as I'm sure many of you are aware, was a social movement that originated in the late 19th century and continued throughout the early 20th century. As I mentioned, it was a social movement, in other words, a political movement, which built off the ideas of Charles Darwin. Darwin, of course, is credited as the father of evolutionary science, studying the process of natural selection that allows for the development of environmentally advantageous traits. Social Darwinists took Darwin's ideas and attempted to apply them to human society. The result was a movement that promoted the idea of survival of the fittest to human relations. Unsurprisingly, this became a way of justifying racism, colonialism, and imperialism. They propagated the idea that subjugation was the same as the process of natural selection. And they didn't simply stop with subjugation. The practice of eugenics was also intimately tied to the movement. Eugenics was a set of scientific beliefs and practices that were aimed at allegedly improving the quality of the human race. Thus, desirable traits should be selectively bred, while undesirable ones should be phased out, either through forced sterilization or outright genocide. With that in mind, I don't think I need to explicitly mention what these people consider desirable and undesirable. It's not surprising that now eugenics is most often associated with the Nazis. However, we don't have to go all the way to Germany to find examples of genocidal science. In fact, we have an example that occurred right next door to us in Tuskegee, Alabama. The Tuskegee experiment was a scientific study conducted from 1932 to 1972. That's 4 years. By both the U.S. Public Health Service and the CDC. And its goal was to observe the effects of untreated syphilis. In order to do this, the scientists involved lied to around 400 black men who had syphilis and claimed to be giving them treatment when in reality they were not. This was happening while at the same time well-known syphilis treatments existed. Again, these men were not told about what was really going on, and they were prevented from getting actual treatment. As a result, over 100 of them died. I cannot stress enough that this was not done by some random group of scientists at a university. This was done by the US government itself. This was allowed to happen because our society, our system, did not and still does not value the life of black people. The Tuskegee experiment was not simply a misstep of ethics as it is often characterized. It was a reflection of our system. It was science and politics walking hand in hand. But right-wing science isn't limited to genetics and disease. Technological innovations are also a core part of our political developments. These technological developments and their political outcomes can best be seen through our military. Trillions of dollars get put toward our military every single year, and large amounts of that money go directly into the scientific development of weapons. It shouldn't be surprising that schools like Georgia Tech, which are revered for their engineering programs, also have pathways to funnel graduates directly into the military industrial complex, where they work for companies like Lockheed Martin and Boeing. It takes scientists to develop these weapons, and once they're developed, the U.S. drops them on the heads of innocent civilians, like the 168 people, the majority of which were young girls, that were killed when the U.S. bombed a school in Iran in February of this year. Or they send these weapons to other countries, like Israel, who uses them to destroy homes, schools, refugee camps, and hospitals. Now let's get back to the history for a moment and discuss the biggest bomb of all, the atomic bomb. The atomic bomb was developed during World War II through the Manhattan Project. The US government enlisted the help of numerous scientists to develop this weapon, and as we all know, used it to end the war by bombing Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The decision to use the atomic bomb and even to develop it was not simply about ending the war, though. It was about sending a message to the rest of the world. It was about establishing the United States as the supreme empire of the planet. The US used the atomic bomb to ensure that they were now the ones in charge of global affairs, and they wanted to make sure that no one could challenge them. It was a political move, plain and simple. Despite their efforts, there was one country that did challenge them, that being the Soviet Union. Prior to 1917, Russia and Eastern Europe were overwhelmingly an agricultural-based economy. Industrialization was minimal, and a majority of the population toiled over fields on land that was still controlled under a feudal system. The October Revolution changed all of that. The Soviet Union was formed, rapidly industrialized, and in just 50 years from the revolution, put the first satellite in space, the Sputnik 1. Then, 4 years later, put the first man in space, Yuri Gagarin. Another 2 years after that, they put the first woman in space, Valentina Tereshkova. All of this development, from industrialization to space exploration, was accomplished in such a short time frame, and that was chiefly due to the socialist governance of the USSR. The Soviet Union accomplished something that no other country up to that point ever had, and it was their politics and their ideology that enabled such rapid and progressive development. In the Soviet Union, science was an important aspect of national policy. It was elevated as an integral part of human existence, and it resulted in the USSR being a global leader in various fields such as mathematics, chemistry, physics, and engineering. I think it's also worth noting that due to their promotion of science, there were more women working in STEM fields in the USSR than there are women working in STEM currently in the US. The USSR, similar to the US, also used science to advance its military. We all know about the arms race, However, the Soviet Union's military differed greatly from that of the US. While the US was attempting to wipe out national liberation movements, the USSR was actively supporting them. The USSR used their science, technology, and military to fight against imperialism, while the US used theirs to support it. Of course, there were political gains for the USSR by doing this, so I'm not trying to paint the picture that it was perfect and without its own contradictions. However, we can definitively say that the USSR was an integral part of ending colonialism. Meanwhile, the US and Western Europe were the colonizers. At this point, as I'm sure you can see, we've begun talking about what I like to call left-wing science. Left-wing science and its achievements are not isolated solely to the USSR, however. For example, we could look to Cuba and their healthcare system. In Cuba, healthcare is nationalized, ensuring free healthcare to all of its citizens, while US healthcare is based on profit and selling you cures to aid ailments you have acquired. Cuba's healthcare system is based on preventative care. In other words, it's about ensuring that you don't develop these ailments in the first place. The Cuban government has put healthcare at such a high priority that it is even enshrined into their constitution in Article 50, which states that, quote, everybody has a right to health protection and care, end quote. I think sometimes we forget that Che Guevara was originally a trained physician. Still, there are significant challenges. However, these challenges are primarily driven by the US embargo, an embargo which I will add has been condemned by the UN General Assembly for 33 consecutive years. With the most recent vote having 165 countries condemn the embargo. Despite this, Cuba still maintains one of the most progressive healthcare systems in the world, especially when compared to countries of similar economic development. For example, in 2015, Cuba was the first country in the world to eliminate mother-to-child transmission of HIV and syphilis, an outstanding achievement. Their life expectancy is 78 years, only one less than the US and significantly higher than most Caribbean countries. It leads one to ask, why is Cuba able to do so much with so little, while the US has so much and does so little comparatively? The answer is the same as when we discussed the Tuskegee experiment. Cuba's healthcare system is a reflection of its socialist system. In Cuba, people and their lives are valued. Healthcare is not treated as something to make money off of, but as a guaranteed human right. Similar human-first policies could be observed in Burkina Faso, where under their socialist government headed by Thomas Sankara, they had the radical idea that instead of allowing their population to live with disease, like the US government did in Alabama, instead they should cure disease. The Burkina Faso government successfully vaccinated 77% of children under the age of 6 against measles, meningitis, and yellow fever in only a few weeks. For context, in Burkina Faso at this time, a large fraction of child mortality was attributed to preventable disease. Because of their campaign, both child and infant mortality was significantly reduced, and furthermore, there was an increase in primary school completion. Vaccinations were not the only thing the Sankara government accomplished through science. During the 1960s and 70s, while still under colonial rule, around 100,000 people died from famine, caused by the forceful appropriation of livestock and grain by the colonial authorities. The revolutionary government established Revolutionary Defense Committees, or CDRs, which acted as local authorities and became intimately involved in the community. The CDRs worked to distribute food to areas affected by drought and planted trees to prevent the spread of desertification. Sankara also championed self-sufficiency and sovereignty from foreign aid, working to promote locally grown rice, maize, and millet. Additionally, the Ministry of Water, which was established in 1984, built thousands of wells and small dams across the country to facilitate better access to clean water. Unfortunately, in 1987, Sankara was assassinated and his government was overthrown by their former colonial rulers, the French. Although, to end on a brighter note, the ongoing revolution in Burkina Faso, led by the current president Ibrahim Traoré, gives hope that the reforms of the Sankara period can now continue. And with that, we've come to the end of my short list of examples. While this certainly is not an exhaustive list, I hope that the intention has been made clear by them, that being that science is political. Science is not an independent institution operating outside the system. It's quite the opposite, actually. Science is an integral part of the system. It is a reflection of the system it operates in. That can either mean scientific racism and imperial conquest, or it can mean free and public health care, ecological reform, and national liberation. And this reality is only becoming more evident as the global temperature continues to rise. At a time when we need more innovation coming from environmental science and more funding towards renewable energies, the US government, and more appropriately, the corporate oligarchies that control the US government, seem intent on maintaining our reliance on fossil fuels. We have to ask ourselves, will we allow science to continue being right-wing science, or will we work for the establishment of left-wing science? Science will either support the systems of oppression and domination, or it will work to tear them down. Which would you prefer? Thank you.
All right, thank you, Liam. That was a great presentation. Initial thoughts on that. What are y'all thinking after that presentation? What are some things that come to mind? Don't all jump up at once.
I think the most pressing right now is how we are going to deal with data centers. That is a great example of how science is political, and it will be used as a weapon against marginalized communities. So we need to stay, on top of the issue and show up when they try to bring it close to us. Because while they say that marginalized communities are the ones who are gonna benefit from AI, that's really far from the truth. They're going to extract from our communities so that others benefit.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good point.
Yes, I agree with that, and I want to add that the most urgent thing that we need to think about right now is voting and trying to get people in representation that they are not going to continue to use the fossil fuels, continue to, have carbon emissions, continue to, not saying that when Democrats are in office or that things are perfect, but I think that, sometimes it's
It's
to our
smoother than
advantage. Say again?
It's smoother than what's going on now.
Yes, so it's not going in the right direction, that's for sure. And, even if everyone did all that they could right now to, stop carbon emissions or, to halt it or to decrease it, we still wouldn't be in a good place, So it's not a good outcome either way, but at least we should be thinking about the future, those behind us, and, doing what we can. So that's what I was thinking, just like the urgency of now and what we need to do.
Anybody else want to share some initial thoughts?
I think it's a great presentation. The way you spin it, right? You really look at it, and you a critical thinker. Science is the one thing that don't lie. Science is math. 1 + 1 will always equal 2, and sun plus rain always gonna make flowers grow. So what he did was he showed how the science, and people believe in science. Science can be used to manipulate you. So they use the science to get you thinking a certain way, and the way they present the science to you, you started to believe in it. And that's at every corner of every aspect of everything, political, not political, business, whatever the case may be. So what I got out of it is put your critical thinking hat on, flip it, look at stuff from the outside of the box, and you'll see all 3 sides of the story. It's their side, your side, and it's the truth. And then you make the decision to go from there. Good job.
Any other thoughts?
So I'm a biologist, this is my life. And I see a lot, like my colleagues are struggling in a lot of different places, is the way that the government has changed funding for scientists. And I see a lot of people, like you were saying with NASA, like why are we spending money? People are starving to death and we're sending people around the moon. But you're right that the acknowledgement is not about the $80 billion we're sending to Israel versus the like 1.2 million we're sending to the moon or whatever. But I think like, so I study birds, that's my field of science, and like people love birds, they're appealing, and luckily it doesn't cost millions of dollars to study them. But the birds that I study live in the same environment that we all do, and if they're not doing well, that's a wake up sign for all of us, that something else is happening. And so I think like, I care a lot about trying to talk to people about what I'm doing and like, hear about what they're thinking, and I think the intersection of sociology and conservation especially is becoming more important. You can't have a scientist come to a community and tell them something that they need, like you can't farm here anymore, or you can't live your life the way that you are used to. I think it has to be a conversation with people. And I think, at least in my field, I think scientists are becoming better at that, about talking to the communities that they're involved working in. But it's a painful history of people coming in and extracting, even for science, extracting resources and so that they can just get published or make money. So it's all connected, and I think, I wish more people just talk to each other about what we were doing and why, and stop trying to be in this like ivory tower.
Do you all remember when the pandemic first started, how long was the quarantine period?
3 months, 2 months.
It was like 2 weeks, right?
14 days.
14 days.
Yeah, it was 14, yeah, you had to, at the beginning of the pandemic, yeah, at the beginning of the pandemic, the recommendation from all of the CDC and everybody else was 14 days, right? Do y'all remember what it ended up being like a year later?
5 days.
It went down to like 5 days and it was like 48 hours.
48 hours.
Right? Now, I don't study viruses, right? I did major in biology, I know a little bit about viruses. But the thing that was the most obvious to me throughout the pandemic was how much, as Liam said, corporate entities drive health policy, right? Because how do we go from a 14-day quarantine period to, and at a point where most people hadn't even taken the vaccine, a 48-hour quarantine period? And it was because, one, companies were trying to get people back to work, right? And so the longer you have to quarantine, that's somebody that's not working, that's not making the company money. But two, they needed people to start spending money again, right? So then they started saying, okay, you gotta be 6 feet apart. Well, okay, now you don't really have to be 6 feet apart, right? Things kept changing, things kept changing, and that damaged a lot of people's confidence and trust in the CDC and in our institutions of health. The people who are responsible for our public health, people are trying to figure out, why are y'all flip-flopping like this? It doesn't make sense, and nobody's giving a clear explanation as to why. Another thing, we talked about carbon emissions and climate change. One of the things that I think, to me, is very indicative of the ways in which our system, particularly capitalism, dictates, because like Maurice said, science is very clear, right? When you do the study and you get the results, you get the data is what the data is. That's not something you can change. But what can change and what can be manipulated is the conclusions that are given to you, right? They say that this is the data, but then they tell you what the data means or what we should do with this data, right? And I feel like for the past 50 years, as it comes to climate change, we have the data on climate change. You can read the data for yourself. You can see these increases in temperatures. You can see what's causing it, what's driving it. They've studied all the industries, and the data shows very clearly which industries are driving, our climate change. But then the conclusions that we come to really don't make sense, right? Because why is the responsibility on me to not use plastic bags, or now I gotta drink out of paper straws? But Shell and Exxon and all these companies can continue to dig for oil, right? Or even better one, the ways in which they will even take renewable energy and turn that into a capitalist endeavor. You think about electric cars and Elon Musk, right? the technology that has to go into the electrification of vehicles, for example, is, if everyone hasn't heard by now, cobalt, lithium, these different minerals that are mined typically in what we consider third world countries, the Congo, right, being a big one right now, being discussed. So we get the benefits of electrification, right, where the carbon output in the United States is decreased because now people may be switching over to electric cars. But what happens in the Congo, in a community that has a huge gaping hole that is there because companies are mining for cobalt and lithium? What happens to those individuals from that community that have to go down there and mine the cobalt and the lithium, and there's no labor protections for them, there's no proper PPE, and they're breathing in all those things, right? That's land that can't be used for farming, that's land that can't be used to develop housing, that's land that can't be used for infrastructure for that community. So even then, we can see the ways in which capitalism extracts from one place, even when they say, well, this is renewable, this is the best way to go about it, right? But somebody else has to pay the cost for that. Even then, you begin to think a little further. There are some states where people are discussing the possibility of outlawing gas-powered vehicles, cars, right? Gas-powered cars. Everybody has to drive electric by 2035. You think about it even then. Think about, one, can everybody in that state or in that community afford to make that transition?
No.
And then think about the fact that the United States already does not invest in public transportation, right? And you tell somebody who's probably been driving the same truck for 30, 40 years, they can't afford to get a new truck already, but now you tell them they have to get an electric vehicle. What is the benefit of that to them, right? And so this isn't to say that we don't invest in renewable technologies, that we don't invest in renewable energy. But to the point I was making earlier, we really have to take into consideration whose interests are we serving? Who are we allowing to be the deciders of what a sustainable future looks like? And are we taking into consideration all of the people that are going to be affected?
Yeah, I was just thinking about how the first electric car, some of you may know, I think it was in the 1950s. So since then, there's been no, or maybe it was even prior to that, the technology was available. But so the US government could have, say, okay, we want to make this transition, so we want to start subsidizing this in some kind of way. We want to make this cheap. And it was somebody I heard on Democracy Now! Where in China, which is a news show, independent news media, no corporate sponsorship, but forget his name, but that China was producing electric vehicles for $9,000 in US dollars. They also, according to him, did this pretty much robotically. So I don't know, I don't know about that, because that means some humans didn't have the job. But my point is to say, in response to your point about, I can't afford an electric vehicle. So, I would like to have one, but back to your point about now you're supposed to, buy this expensive vehicle. But just that I think the US government could have done something to subsidize that process and to help the cost be lower. Of course, that doesn't take care of the problem with the mining, So I think it's just it's a difficult situation we put ourselves in.
Yeah, I think that as long as, and for me, I think as long as capitalism is the economic system, people are always going to need something to sell. And when you always need something to sell, there's always going to be exploitation. So, even in terms of the science, I think that science is clear that there's only so much we can extract from the earth at the rates at which we're going, right? And when you are in an economy that is focused on growth, and growth is the only thing they care about, you can't grow, like endless growth is not a unfathomable thing. You know, it has its limits. Growth has its limits. And I've heard somebody one time make the point that like, uncontrolled growth in the human body is a cancer, right? So we can apply that same sort of mentality to the ways in which we are treating our planet as well.
You wanna go ahead and?
Oh, I mean, there's a part of me, I guess this is a selfish part of me, that if them benefiting monetarily makes them care and do something, then I'm almost okay with it. Like, from the sake of the planet, if there are rich people who get involved to save the planet, and they get rich off that, there's a piece of me that isn't, I understand, I completely agree that they shouldn't benefit from it, but there's a part of me that's like, if that's the only way to get something to happen under our system, then maybe that's not a very revolutionary thought.
No, not at all.
I was just gonna say, maybe we change how we measure our growth, like change, instead of it being, who is it, I forget his name, an economist for years now has said, I wish I could remember his name, but, no, it's not him, but Herman Daly, maybe? But going back to, that the measure of our economy shouldn't be just through financial transactions, like gross domestic product. So for example, cancer is very well embedded into our economy. So people make money off cancer treatments. Or when a hurricane comes to the Gulf Coast, people just rebuild because it makes money to rebuild the condo right on the Gulf of Mexico. And so maybe we take into account the health of people as we measure our economy and its strength by, growth, I think is implied there, but we take into account, well, how healthy are people? How many people actually have cancer? And let that be part of the measurement. But the other thing I was gonna say was that Exxon, knew about global warming. Y'all probably know that. There's their own documents, their own scientists show that back in the 80s, maybe late 70s, this is going to be a problem if we keep on this path. And, Inside Climate News is a really good outlet, and they have the Exxon documents on their website on a particular news story, signed and everything. So, it's just like the capture of the state by these fossil fuel companies and tech companies. And so they get to make legislation and have undue control over our legislature and our country.
And even to the point of like, because I understand what you're saying in terms of, well, if profit is what it takes to get rich people involved. But to Liam's point, you think about somebody like Elon Musk, who, you look at what he's doing, right? It's electric vehicles, it's supposedly, renewable and it's better than gas-powered vehicles. But then you also look at his politics, and it's like, is that really who you want? It's like, is that really who you want at the head of these innovations, right? Because ultimately, again, I think that one of the things, for me personally, the moral compass of the people involved also matters, and I think that they may get involved because they see a profit, but I think that has a limit to which it's going to be beneficial in the long run, right? And I think that in the short term, you might see, people used to love Elon Musk at a point, right? Because they thought he was like,
we didn't know him.
all right, so but now we see that like, okay, maybe this was not the guy that we should have put all of this like energy and hope behind just because he was, saying that he was doing something amazing for the planet. So I think that, that is essentially like the point we are trying to get at, is to really get people to understand that ultimately it also matters like what these people's ethics are, because there's only so much good science you can do with bad ethics, right? And I don't think that anyone who's ambitions is to become a billionaire or remain a billionaire is going to have the necessary ethics to also be involved in viable solutions when it comes to science or healthcare. I mean, you can look at the healthcare system and just see how problematic it is that there's so much of capitalism that is embedded in our healthcare system, right? Like you said, people's access to treatment, and the amount of what treatment costs. I mean, just a visit to a hospital and the kind of debt that I can put somebody in, these are the kinds of things that we really have to ask ourselves. And so for me, I think that, for example, I think that we have to give our communities and the everyday person the ability to understand, one, what's purposes science is supposed to serve, right? Because in one of these conversations that we were having, people were talking about the fear of like trying to engage with science communication because of how right-wing politics has made people like turn away from science. And somebody was saying, well, how do we make this non-political? And I'm like, well, you can't. There's no way you can do that, all right? Because ultimately, what you're trying to, the information you're trying to present to them is information that you are hoping they will use to make political decisions. So how can you approach it in a non-political way? And I think that takes a little bit of the authenticity out of what you're trying to do. And it doesn't really hit home for people if you're trying to disconnect it from the outcome that you're hoping for, right? I mean, I'm sure all institutions of science would love more funding. That's something that comes through policy. So you can't try to approach it through a non-political lens because the outcome is going to take politics, And so that's some of the things that like we think about, like for example, how many of you in this room would consider yourself scientists? Right. So even that, like, how would you define science?
It's all around us. Air,
Like
So,
studying something through a process to figure out results and make decisions.
Right. So I think one of the things that like I try to get people to understand is that science is a method, right? It's not an outcome. Science is a method. It's a method through which you do things, and the scientific method is a way in which you approach the world to try to reach the most objective conclusions possible, right? Through empirical data and evidence and things like that, right? So it's ways in which you go about studying your observable world, and I think that a lot of people don't realize that you use the scientific method in your everyday life, right? Just like you use math in your everyday life in times that you may not realize it. And so, when it comes to just even thinking about citizens science, right, and the responsibility that we have as citizens to be scientists, to try to reach the most objective, conclusions in our everyday life so that we can make the most informed decisions. This is a power that you have that I think a lot of us are not using, and so I think that all of us have the capacity to be scientists. If you're somebody who knows how to think and knows how to read, write, do math, or just knows how to observe the world, right? I mean, the first agriculturalists did not need a lab to figure out how to, develop agriculture. It was something that was done through their observation of like, oh, when you drop the seed in this dirt and it rains, it grows, right? And then they say, how can we replicate this so we can feed ourselves? So we don't have to keep chasing woolly mammoths around, or like, foraging berries, nuts and berries. So that is science. And I also think like part of the disconnect in science is the failure of science to acknowledge, particularly Western science, to acknowledge the contributions of other people to science. Somebody made this point one time that if you think about like math or science, right, you have like, there's a section of math and science that's always named after some white man, right? The Fibonacci sequence, Avogadro's number, Newton's laws of thermodynamics, right? Then you have like the quadratic formula. Like, who came up with that?
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Right? That was something that was developed by by Muslims, right? But because it was developed by a non-white culture, we don't give it a name, right? So think about it. Think about all the things in science and math that don't have a name, and where those things come from versus the things that do clearly have a name. And so even this that's a political thing because it's propaganda. It embeds within your mind that the most important contributors to math and science are white men throughout history,
Yeah.
right?
I never thought about that. That's crazy.
I mean,
Cause who was the Muslim person that developed the quadratic
right.
instead of just naming it?
But you also think about what that says about these cultures, right? You have one culture that is not obsessed with putting a name to something because this is something that belongs to all of us.
Everybody, yeah.
And then you have another culture that wants to make it very clear that I did this and I am the sole proprietor of this idea, right? This thing we call intellectual property, right? So I think that even then we see the politics in like the way in which science and math are taught to us. as
And
well.
how we can access.
Right, and how we can access it. You know, I mean, if it wasn't for Muslims, we wouldn't have maps. We wouldn't have the numbers that we use, Arabic numerals, right? Before Western science, you know, African doctors knew you had to wash your hand before you stick it in a woman's stomach to deliver a baby. The white doctors didn't know that until they were like, why do these women keep dying? Because you keep sticking your dirty hands in them. You know? So, I mean, you think about all of these things.
Or indigenous communities, all the knowledge indigenous people have about nature and how to protect it. And take care of it.
Yeah, I mean, food. You think about corn, tomatoes, squash.
Reminds me of the conversation about, like raw milk and how
Yes.
people are like, oh, like I don't need my milk to be pasteurized. I'm just gonna boil it myself it reminds me of the problem, like that is pasteurization.
Yes.
It's, unfortunately, I think the big thing here is that like branding is such a major part of like what we know is success. And hi everybody, I'm Austin by the way. This is the first time I spoke. But branding I think is the one thing that is like the focus that unfortunately does work. Like marketing and branding is how like these ideas become known and how we like make like associations with certain like areas of our politics because it's so embedded in that culture. Like branding unfortunately is an important aspect of that. Sorry, you can.
No, you're fine. Yeah, no, that's an important point, and like even to your point, right? Indigenous science, we wouldn't have corn, tomatoes, and squash without indigenous people, right? You know, and so all of these things that have gone into making our lives what they are contributions that were made by more than just white people. But like you said, the branding and the marketing of it, you know, does not necessarily inform us of those things. And so we don't associate corn and tomatoes with indigenous people. We associate tomatoes with Italians, right? Or corn with the Midwest, with some white
Or
guy farmer in the
chocolate with
Midwest.
Europe.
Yeah, you know.
Chocolate with Europe.
Yeah, or like chocolate with Europe. Where does chocolate grow in Europe?
Nowhere.
Nowhere.
Nowhere. The
You know,
cocoa comes from
they import it to Europe from either Africa
Or
South,
coffee.
or South America. They process it there and then they call it German chocolate or Belgian chocolate or Italian leather. Like these are not your products. These are not, you know. So to you guys' point, that's a political thing.
Yeah, I think there's two, like Texas basmati rice, which is like, whoa, what is that? You know, because this India, I mean, it's an Asian. Yeah, but I think, and you know, like you're saying, intellectual property or the copyright. I don't know, not copyright, but
Patent.
yeah, the patent. So then they can sell it as a Texas product, which originally is not from Texas.
Right.
Yeah, so now that we're talking about food, I think that's a great point with science because nowadays we have problems because of how we produce our food. When we have learned and know for centuries from indigenous cultures how to have what is this like
Regenerative.
regenerative agriculture, but somehow we or government still commits to help the people who makes money producing in mass what we eat. And for example, in Mexico, a big discussion is that the US wants us to buy yellow corn when that is not our diet. And they want to impose it because there was a treaty, but that's not even something we eat. It kills our own varieties of corn. So it is a political decision that just because of profit.
Yeah, and that reminds me of the fact I read that in Peru there's over 8,000 varieties of potato. You could probably only name 2, if that. Right? You had something you can.
Well, and to that, like almost all the agriculture in the world is to feed livestock. Like
Yeah.
almost all the land that we
Yeah.
grow food on is not even for people to eat, because we're just feeding our livestock to then eventually feed us. So. I was gonna say, I think also the thing that I hear people talk about when they say they don't trust science is I think there's a lot of science that stops when they be like, well, poverty's bad for people. Like we've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to show that when people are poor, their lives are worse. And then and then they're like, well, let's go study it again somewhere else and spend another study. But they don't actually okay, what can we do to fix? Like it's just science for the sake of science is some kinds of
Science.
Yeah,
For
it's
the
a
sake
waste.
of a video.
Yeah.
Like,
Because you're not
I
supposed
did this study.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because if you had to provide a solution based on the science, you would have to say we can't
And the system,
solve poverty through capitalism.
Well, you're not supposed to care.
You're not.
supposed to be objective.
You're supposed to, you're supposed to
Which-
create the science, hand it over to the government, and then
Yeah.
they say, well, we're gonna fix poverty by throwing more people in prison.
And if you care about something, your science is questioned, like, oh, well, you just have an agenda or you're
Right.
biased, so, you're supposed to not care and not have any emotion attached to what it is that you're doing, which, comes back from, I have to say, goes back to the Francis Bacon, scientific method thing, but human beings who do science have values. I mean, they can do, they can say, they can get other people to look at their data and their analysis to say, okay, have I left anything out? Is it biased or whatever? But as a human being, why am I doing the research on corn anyway? Well, I grew up on a farm and I care about corn, but you're not supposed to say that. So this whole idea about what we mean by objectivity has to be rethought, I think.
Everybody brings a bias.
Yeah.
Like, so I sang
Right.
bird song, and I was taught even in undergrad not that long ago that male birds sing and female birds don't. And we've done studies now that have shown, first of all, the tropics have known that females have song for decades. But men are less likely to study female birds, and all these men were saying female birds don't sing. Most female birds sing, but nobody was ever paying attention to it. The tropics have been saying it for years, but men in North America and Europe were saying no, because everybody just brings their own bias, and they're not, yeah, it's nuts to be like, nah, the females don't do anything,
Right.
because I'm a man.
Yeah.
It's just so silly. I mean, I don't even think it's not malicious, right? Everyone brings your own bias.
Yeah, it's impossible. not
No,
to.
masculinity is
Well,
malicious in this form.
Patriarchy
When we
is
think
very
about the
malicious.
patriarchy is
Let
very
me rephrase,
malicious.
I don't think it was intentional. I don't think they were intentional, it's their bias.
The outcome is bad though.
For sure.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a great point, about the way bias, shapes science. I mean, for a long time,
Everywhere.
there were, doctors who said black people don't feel pain the same way that white people do.
Yeah.
Which is
Especially-
like, what does that, how did you?
That's still public,
And
there's
that's-
still studies that
They
say
still,
that,
the doctors still think that about black women. That's why it's, Black Maternal Health Week was last week. But I've just seen article after article about the numbers of black women dying during birthing, and just in our state alone, Georgia's like up there in the national average. So
I mean, you think about sterilization, right?
yeah.
And how many black and indigenous women were sterilized
Mm-hmm.
by the government. I mean, that's science, but it's also very clearly political. I remember also learning about how skin diseases are understudied on darker skin, right? So a lot of when a doctor is coming to examine, a black patient, and they have a certain skin disease, it can get missed because they've only seen it on white skin in medical school or under textbooks. They don't know what it looks like on black skin, right? So people go undiagnosed or underdiagnosed for certain conditions, and then you get certain myths like, oh, well, black people don't get skin cancer. Well, it manifests differently on our skin when we do get it, right? Or different things like psoriasis or whatever the case may be, where it's like, yeah, it's very obvious on a lighter skin, it's gonna show up red, and the contrast in color is there, but like, you're not gonna see me turn red, like, that's just not, if you see me turn red, something is really, really wrong. But so just things like that, and just, you have to ask questions why, and it gets into the politics of things, and, when you don't see a certain group of people as human or deserving of that kind of care and attention, then you don't put the investment into making sure that you know what certain things look like on them. Or when you don't care about women, you don't study female birds. Like it's really it's really that simple sometimes, but it can blow your mind to like the things that bias does, to our science and our health is incredible.
Well, that's why I tried to frame it as like the way science institutions function is a reflection of like whatever the current system is.
Yeah.
So if misogyny is prevalent, then you're not going to study female birds. If racism is prevalent, then you're not going to study how disease affects black people. Or when you do it, you're going to lie to them about it, and
let them be sick.
Yeah, and let 100 people die.
Or when your priorities are money, you tell everybody you only got to quarantine for 48 hours. It's not that bad, and then you go back to work and get everybody else sick. All right.
Yeah.
So, those kind of things. But yeah.
I even see where they're starting to try to do away with more of the work from home jobs. Because they want people back physically in the office, and or they're just downsizing. They don't want nobody working that way. So
yeah,
it's crazy.
Yeah.
And you even see instances where when the science does say one thing and the government or whoever doesn't like it, they will go just clearly against it and say we're just gonna do something else. No matter, we don't care what the science says.
Yeah, well, it was killed. All the
Was it?
scientists have gone missing.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were like scientist number 12 or something.
10 or 12.
Yeah.
All
Scientists,
over the country.
Yeah.
Don't nobody save the care.
scientists are going missing.
Yes.
There's like 12 that have disappeared.
A certain
Yes.
kind of
Are
science.
dead.
They're like high level. Some of them are doing like nuclear physics,
Yeah,
like a bunch of.
A lot of NASA scientists.
They like go for a hike and then never come back, and it's
And
all.
then they'll find like their personal and work phones and wallet and keys like in their house.
They're not even trying to hide it, man. Like that.
No.
I mean, but
It's
do they have
very
to?
textbook.
You know?
You
I'm
already know
glad
they
I
do
studied
it.
birds.
Yeah.
They didn't even-
But it's like do they
Normally it'd
have
be like
to
a car
hide it?
accident or something. Now they just snatching folks up.
Yeah.
Well, there's that story. I would need to double check the validity of this, but I've been told this many times by different people of like this. It was back a while ago, where someone had developed like a water-powered vehicle
Oh
or
yeah, all those
something,
people die.
and then the CIA essentially just killed all of them, or the FBI or whoever.
Anyone who
Because it
develops,
was
like,
too
plastic.
much of a it threatened the oil industry too much.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I mean, even to that, right? Think about, like lobbying. Lobbying is a big part of like which science the government ends up caring about, right? And like the point Dr. Garland made earlier is that there is, if you go back in history, you can see at different points in history where there were sustainable alternatives to what it is that is in mass production now, that our government just decided not to implement because they were lobbied by a particular industry to say that this is what we want. These are the policies we want you to invest in. And these are the technologies we want you to push, and we'll put the money. And so even with that, thinking about lobbying and like I remember when I learned about lobbying in like middle school and high school, they made it seem like I could go up to Washington and lobby my government, right? And then it's like, well, no, you actually need like billions of dollars for your government to care about whatever it is you're talking about, right? So even to that point, like as Liam has said, the system directly influences how our science is used, you know, and even our social sciences, right? Social and political sciences and how those are used and things like that. So, you know, like she mentioned, like science gets up to a point where it says, okay, we've studied that, you know, and these things cause poverty, crime, you know, these things cause crime, poverty, lack of access to resources, poor health, this, that, and the third. But then what our government decides to do is put more police in our neighborhoods, right? Not invest in, you know, lowering poverty rates, not invest in better health outcomes, not invest in all of the things that the science has says causes the crime, right? But they'll say, no, we need to put more police in our neighborhoods. Why? Because policing is an intrinsic part of capitalism and the oppression that our system enforces upon people. So it's those kinds of things that I think like are very important when it comes to the politics of science.
I think, so I'm new to Georgia, I just moved here last summer, and I think like hunting is a big part of the culture here, and that was something that was new for me. I was in Colorado before, which they're hunters there too, but hunters are like the #1 support for conservation research in the state. Like money from hunting and fishing support conservation more than anything else, and I think there's this, people don't think of like hunting, I think, is associated with being more conservative and that kind of thing, and they're contributing so much to conservation, and so there's so many ways to, you know, like what people care about is not as tied to their political, like there's ways that through political beliefs to connect with people, and that's been an interesting thing that I've realized here of like hunters care so much about conservation, but if I were to come to them sometimes just from the perspective of being this like left-wing scientist, we wouldn't be able to have the same conversation about the things that we both care about, so it's interesting.
And I think too, like sometimes people mistake the idea of being like political with being partisan, which is not the same thing, right? Like when we say science is political, we're not saying it's Democrat or Republican, this or that. We're just saying that science affects the way you live your life.
It's about power.
It's about power. It affects everything about your life, and that is a political thing, right? It affects everything about our society. So when we're having a conversation and making that point to people, I think that that's important, because I think what people have kind of fallen into is the tricks of partisan politics. That this is the blue people's stuff, right? To care about science is a Democrat thing. Like she said, a lot of people that hunt in Georgia are probably not Democrats. They're probably not left leaning, but the money that they pay for their licenses and all this stuff goes towards conservation, you know, efforts. Because if there's no conservation efforts, there's nothing to hunt, right? So it's like that is political right there. That's a direct tie between what you do and how you're able to do it, you know. And I think that sometimes people miss that.
Well, I think people vote against their best interests all the time, and I do believe that certain parties put forth certain policies that benefit the earth and people more than others. So I think it's all tied in together. At the end of the day, it is about the policy. At the end of the day, we vote on people that represent us through the policy.
Right.
And, you know, again, like we can look at the data, we can look at the numbers, we can look at who has done that in the past. People don't care. They don't care. It's apathy right now. To Arnita's point about the Black maternal health care. Right now in California, there's a lawsuit, a white woman suing that there's an organization that caters to Black women because of the data. She feels like she should also get that. Do you think she cares about the data?
No.
No, she doesn't. She has a lawyer, and they're gonna fight this to get. I mean, that's the way it is. If a hunter is doing things that the policy benefits them towards conservation, they're not. I don't care. I mean, I can't be 100% sure, but here you're gonna vote with the party that is against someone taking something away from you that you think they don't deserve, which is usually, oh, that Black person, that Mexican person, that person over there is getting something like it's a zero game sum. You know, and it's not. because I got this because of the history of this country, or because I've been oppressed, or because you've been trying to kill me, or because I'm so stressed out because, I'm trying to breathe and live, does not mean that because I'm getting something, you're not, you already had this, or you were never going to get this because you don't have the same issues. But people don't see that, people don't care. It's like, I just had a conversation with someone yesterday saying that their son didn't understand, what's going on, why he's not getting the benefits that other people get. This is a 21-year-old, like, and his parents are talking to him about this, but it's like, people have to experience things, and like the ignorance, again, sincere ignorance or conscientious stupidity, either one is driving people to do things to not care about their fellow man.
Yeah.
And that's what we are, and I just don't see how I don't see how we're going to get past that right now. It seems like we're in a very dangerous place and time where, I think we might be like in the point right after Reconstruction. We've been here before. The writing's on the wall. Like, I think that we're going to be in a battling place soon. That people are just going to, them against us. Them against us.
Yeah,
And something, you gotta choose your side.
Yeah, we're already in a violent place. But I think, to your point, to kind of tie all these 3 points together, what Liam said earlier, I think that the point I was trying to make, right, is that you take somebody who is conservative or right wing, who's a hunter, who does not correlate what they do and the fact that the dues and the fees that they pay go towards conservation. They don't see that as political, and that's the inherent problem. Like Liam said, is that they have in the United States, through our education and being socialized to compartmentalize things, people believe, for example, that, oh, well, if you're going to do something for maternal health, it shouldn't be political, because health shouldn't be political. So essentially what they're saying is, don't do it for the people that need it the most, because now it looks political. But it's like, and what I'm saying is that we have to start making it very clear to people that it is political, and that we should be doing this for that very reason. And I am sort of the way that I see things, right, when we talk about politics especially, I think that a lot of times, especially in more liberal and left-leaning circles, is people lead with a moral high ground when it comes to politics, which is important, right? Like our ethics and moral code is sort of what defines our politics, but you only accomplish things in politics through having power, right? And so I'm not particularly concerned with changing the hearts and minds of right-wing or conservative folks. I'm concerned about getting power and getting in power and the ways in which we can do that. And so you're very correct in saying that, like, yeah, somebody who's on that side of things is not going to care about what the data says, is not going to care about the history, because they're concerned with retaining power in their community and for their circle of people. And we cannot, as we have done in the past, like Dr. King said one time, is that the civil rights movement for the last 8 to 10 years was defined by them pleading for decency, that asked for people to see them as decent people, right? Trying to change the hearts and minds of America. And he was saying that the new era of politics they were entering into is going to be defined by the fight for true equality, right? And what he meant by that is we need to get resources into the place where they're needed, whether these people want to do that or not. We're not going to keep asking for them to see us as decent people, right? And I think that a lot of times that's sort of how we lead on this end of things with our politics, is that, well, we're decent people, so we deserve the same. It's like, I really don't care whether you see me as decent or not. I'm going to figure out to get what I need to get for my community and for the people that need it the most. And whatever the point of conflict comes to, where we have to resolve that, is how it's going to be resolved. But we have to lead with understanding that this is a power play, and that, those folks understand very well what it is they're doing, and they're essentially trying to shape the narrative for people to think that anything, they will associate anything with anything being political with things that are done for more disparaged communities, right? But when the government bails out a big business that is failing, you don't see that as political, right? When Trump is using religion as a tool to further his right wing and his administration's fascist agenda, you don't see that as a political thing, right? Because they've convinced themselves that, well, religion is not political, right? But if I go up there and I say Jesus was black, well, why are you trying to make this about race?
Yeah.
But Trump can post a picture of him as Jesus. You know, right? Like, so I think that these are the things that, like, exactly, right?
Uses data centers.
Right. Uses data centers and AI that is polluting our environment. Right. So these are the things that I think that we really have to, like, come to terms with. It's like, you're right, like, these folks are they're not ever going to try to see, no matter how much information and data or whatever you present to them, they're not ever going to try to see that and make sense of it and come to logical conclusions. Right. And so you're right, like, it's getting to a point where we do have to focus on how we put people in power or put things in place where the power is not within one community of people who are known for historically using that power against everyone else. So
How are we gonna do that?
well, if you're asking me, we do it through a revolutionary process. I think how we're gonna do that, I think, it goes back to sort of kind of what started us, the New Vanguard, on this journey was, when we had our first People's Platform meeting last year, and our message to everybody is that all politics is local. And the reason why we labeled that message is that we have to understand, as people that are trying to fight against the system, that you have to build the infrastructure to be able to take on that system. And when you don't have the infrastructure to do that, you're gonna fail every time you try to go up against the system. And a lot of people bypass the power that they have, especially on a local level, right? Because you think about the things that matter the most, to everyday people: education, healthcare, safety, crime, all these kinds of things. These are things that you have direct influence on locally, right? Starting with your local government and your state government as well. And I think that, and we know, per the data and the numbers, that people do not turn out to local and state elections like they do federal elections. And I think that that's also by design. And what I often tell people is that if you think about how we got to this point where you have, this Project 2025 plan that's being executed, they didn't start implementing this plan when Trump got in office. This was something where they worked people up from the local level, right, through the local governments, up to state governments, and these people now eventually are your senators and your representatives, and are in the, on your Supreme Court and in the White House. But these are all people that started at lower levels, and this was a long-term plan, right? People talk about the Southern strategy, and I mean, think about how long Mitch McConnell has been in government, right? So these are things that have been in place and in play for a long time, and people don't understand that building up this kind of power takes time, and you have to start at the place where you have the most power, right? We can try to fight this at a federal level, but we don't have a lot of power at the federal level. And so if you don't start local and statewide, then you're kind of missing the picture. And I think we've gotten to the point where the urgency kind of is overwhelming.
Yeah.
And so people are like, well, we have to do something big. We have to do something big. The biggest thing you can do is look at what is happening in your local government, right? We can look at what's happened with our county government just recently. I mean, that is how much money that is just somewhere that nobody can find it.
15 million.
8 years to get it.
And your county government makes direct decisions on your EMS services, your water, your roads, your education, like all of these things that affect people's day-to-day lives. that people are not, I mean, we go to these county meetings and I see the same faces all the time. The only time you see different faces is when a sports team might be getting recognized or somebody's getting, you know, some kind of fame, some kind of recognition or whatever. But I think people really undervalue and think that, oh, well, if in 2028 we vote in, or even if at 2026 in November we vote in different people at the midterms, right? But that is still, you're still going over, because eventually when these decisions are made, they have to come down through your local government, right? Your local government, when they receive money from the state or from the federal administration, they get to decide how this money is used, right? So your federal government doesn't directly tell your local government what to do, right? They provide them with the resources, they make resources available. That's one of the big functions of federal government, is to open up resources for local governments to do things, right? So that's why a lot of the talk now is around funding. Federal government's cut funding for this and cut funding for that. It's not that they told your local government you can't do this, it's that we're not gonna give you the money or the resources to do it, right? And so those are some of the things that we have to think about, because a lot of times, even when they do have the resources and funding, they don't do it. You know, I mean, Baldwin County this problem didn't come up in Baldwin County overnight, right? So we have to think about those things as well. So for me, I think that it really starts at the local level, mobilizing people at the local level to really change the dynamics of the institutions and the local government that impacts people's lives every day. And then as you have built that, you can kind of scale things, you know, up towards the state and the federal administration. But it's kind of like one of those mythical monsters where you can cut it off at the head and it grows two new ones, right? Like that's what we're kind of dealing with, right? So sometimes you gotta take the giant out of the knees, right? You can't try to take it out of the head all the time. So you know, it's a lot more complicated than that, obviously. But as a more simplistic answer, I think that's the way that I see things changing. That's why we, as New Vanguard, we're extremely focused on what we can do in Milledgeville, in Baldwin County, and even in surrounding counties. We do a lot of work with people in Hancock County and Sparta as well. But it has to start locally, because if people don't care locally, yeah, you can go out and vote once every 4 years, but I mean, what does that really do? You know, you've had the same commissioners for 30 years. You know, so it's like, what really changes? You know, at the end of the day. So that's how I see that, and I just think that it's gonna take a lot of effort, probably more effort than people are willing to put in. But you know, many are called and few are chosen. So y'all are the few. Welcome to the struggle, comrades. Yeah, the struggle is real. We got about 30 minutes. Anybody have anything they want?
I was just gonna add, have any of you heard of this book, a new book called Muskism? It's
I
by
saw that.
Quinn Sublodian? I don't know if I'm pronouncing his last name correctly, but he's at, I think, Boston University, I think. But anyway, he wrote a book, I haven't read it, but again, on Democracy Now! I heard him talking yesterday that Elon Musk is proposing through SpaceX data centers to be in space, in outer space. That this is something that he sees, and that Slobodian thinks that he's positioning himself, you know, through stealing from taxpayers, essentially, being able to sell you know, products or a trip to Saturn or whatever to people, because, you know, I'm sure y'all sort of tapped into this already, because we're destroying planet Earth, so he's gonna make a profit off of the people who can afford to, you know, escape, essentially. But I had not heard about the idea that data centers, he was thinking, we can put them in outer space. I have no idea about how that would work.
Yeah,
but-
how does that even?
I don't know. Elon Musk says a lot of stupid shit that has no actual basis in science. He's just kind of weird.
Yeah, and he's not a scientist like at all.
None of what he's accomplished is him. None of it. It's
Yeah.
all people that he pays, and then he takes credit. He doesn't, like, none of the science is him.
It was also, part of that is a bit of his background, you know, how, some of his background from South Africa and kind of his belief system, you know, which we know what that is, but he's objective though. He doesn't really have a belief, you know, he doesn't have any values, he's totally objective and, non-political though.
Right.
I was gonna say, to your point about paying attention to stuff locally, I found out about this organization called Science for Georgia. And so they post about, they have stuff that they've come to Milledgeville and given talks, and I found out about the pipeline that they're trying to install through Baldwin County and Jones County. It's all across the south pretty much. It's like straight through the Cotton Belt if you see where the pipeline is, and that's not an accident. But so they post about things like that, and they have like resources to get involved and to comment on. Because there's always, for these things, like for the pipeline, there was a public comment period, and you could submit comments and things like that. So it's a good organization to stay connected to science policy locally.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Isn't the one they told us that it was a federal decision that we couldn't do anything
Yeah, did
about?
you speak
Yeah.
about that at the commissioners meeting?
Yeah, and, I've been told also cause I emailed Peter Hubbard, the new Public Science Commission person, and he emailed me back very quickly and said, that is a federal decision. What they were dealing with in Baldwin County was basically just a courtesy, Sammy Hall said, to, Kinder Morgan is the pipeline company that's actually expanding, you know, building the pipeline, and they had approached the commission saying, we just wanna let people know that this is what's happening. And then there was a several public meetings, I think, locally, which I missed, but Peter Hubbard said that is a federal decision by FERC, F-E-R-C, federal, I forget what it
Yeah, they were
stands
there
for.
at the meeting I went to in Jones County. FERC was there.
Oh, okay.
Did they say anything about?
They just had information about where it was gonna be, but they had people, like a court stenographer taking comments for the public hearing.
And you could give your comments online up until March, something something like that.
But they have, as far as I know, they haven't released a decision yet.
Yeah,
I mean,
I haven't heard, but I haven't.
Okay, so they haven't, it's not decided,
It's not decided
but
yet,
it's
as far
been
as I know.
proposed.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
But I
Well,
would
we know
not
what
be
it
surprised,
means.
yeah, they're gonna build it, I'm sure.
And there's, it runs about 8 miles south of the city of Milledgeville. And there are these compression stations, it's called Hall Gate, that's closest to Milledgeville, and in those compression stations it lets off, so it's a methane gas pipeline, it lets off whatever, you know, every now and then, toxic pollution, I would assume. I mean, I
There's
don't really
many
know that,
documented
but-
leaks of those pipelines.
Yeah.
Reminds me, unfortunately, of I lived in Texas before I moved out here to Milledgeville, and there's a place in Houston. I lived in Austin specifically, but in Houston, where my fiance is from, they have a town called Cancer Alley. Yep. And none of them have a place to go because they couldn't sell their homes, and the way that they've kind of cornered them in on the market has made it impossible to sell that home. On top of going anywhere else because they wouldn't be able to actually sell it. And I'm worried about that with that pipeline now. So that's, I mean, is there anything we can do about that really? Now that, I mean, talking about it's one thing.
The comment period is closed, but.
I mean, there's stuff we can't do.
I don't even talk about that.
No, the
I mean, we should speak out about it no matter what, you know,
Yeah.
even, I mean, we should, first of all, I didn't know about this pipeline until I went, let's see, how did I find out about it? I don't remember, but I went to something that Science for Georgia did on campus at Georgia College, and I think we can just let people know, hey, did you know you're living near this methane gas pipeline and what the consequences are for you? But I was told when I walked out of that county commissioners meeting, someone said, Miss, and she said, I just wanna let you know that we live by the pipeline, and Kinder Morgan has been so nice to us, and there was just no problem, and I was like,
Aaron Brockovich all over again.
I was like, okay, well, I'm so glad there's no problem.
Yeah.
That you know of.
All right.
And
Right.
that's like when Tarbine had all of these people go give pies to the people in Hancock and
Yeah.
like throw them little barbecues. And I was like, yeah, I'm gonna take you to the land your house is sitting on, by the way, and turn it into a railroad.
Yeah.
At least they were nice about it.
Yeah. Look, we're giving you a pie. Like, it's not that big of a deal.
I mean, that, and just, even thinking about that, you know, and just in closing, right, with that, and the ways in which, you know, I had an opportunity to talk to some high school students, a couple weeks ago, and one of the things that we talked about is just how the development that is going on, right, in Milledgeville and Baldwin County, and like who will ultimately benefit from that development. Because, you know, you're talking about this pipeline that's 8 miles outside of the city, and the way the city is being developed, people are being pushed out of the city, right? Black folks particularly, you know, it's a lot of the worry with gentrification and the development of all of these new things. And they're gonna be pushed closer and closer to these places where, you know, these kinds of pipelines and, you know, factories or whatever the case may be. I mean, it should raise questions in everybody's minds why there's a cancer alley in almost every black community you can think of, right? And that's something that has happened intentionally through redlining and gentrification and all these different things. And so, with thinking about that and just kind of to tie all these things together, you know, understanding that science goes into that, politics goes into that, right? And we have to understand how the system essentially uses, you know, science as a tool as well, you know, science as well as a tool to oppress and to continue to push people, you know, further away from resources and things that they need to be able to live their everyday lives. So, any last comments before we close out and mingle and y'all enjoy snacks? Thank you all for coming out. We've been, I don't know who's on the side of the wall. All right. But it's a very, very productive conversation as always, and I hope that you all have, you know, enjoyed it. We have some literature at the back there as well as some flyers for upcoming events. So please take some of those with you. We hope we continue to see you all at our events. We're going to be at the Garden later on this afternoon, so if you have some time, you can come out there with us, get your hands dirty. But all power to the people.
All power to the people.
All right, thank you all. Enjoy the snacks and all and everything else.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right. Good night.
Arnita made us some chicken salad, so please have some.
Yeah, we are. We're gonna pack that up.
Good. I'm sorry I didn't read the celebration yesterday. I just read the first part.
Right,
Which I'm thinking of
Brother's
going.
name to play football.
How was it?
Taylor Swift.
Kelsey. Yeah.
Yes.
I can see it. I can see it.
You good.
All right, thank you for coming.
You're welcome.
How much I work together.
All right, I will let you know before I leave.
I mean, that's
Probably,
maybe that we won't be working together anymore. We're busy.
Yeah, you have better things coming.
Yeah. That's right.
to go to Atlanta.
A lot of joyful things coming.
We might need to get MJ on the pipeline.
I know.
Ideas.